Hello, good evening, and thank you for joining us once again. My name is Jacob Igo, and this evening I will be talking about Introduction to Developmental Psychology. This lecture specifically is for students who are offering developmental psychology as a course, and today we'll be looking at Introduction to Developmental Psychology. But we cannot look at Introduction to Developmental Psychology without looking at psychology itself. And so we'll first of all begin by looking at what psychology is before we go to developmental psychology. Okay, so by definition, psychology is defined as the scientific study of human and animal behavior, including mental processes. Of course, we cannot say that is just the sole definition of psychology. Different scholars, different scientists have come up with different definitions of psychology. But for the sake of this class, we'll concentrate on some of the definitions that I have put up here as we can see them. Psychology is defined as the scientific study of human and animal behaviors, including mental processes. Psychology concentrates more on human and animal as an individual, not as a group, unlike sociology, where you have it, talking about group dynamics and the rest of that. But psychology, it concentrates on the individual as a person. So it studies the individual behavior, mental processes, and so on and so forth. And we don't just dwell on the study of individuals or human beings. We also study animals too. And of course, we know scientists will tell us that we are higher animals. Now, for American Psychological Association, psychology is a scientific study of the mind and behavior. Of course, a lot of us understand psychology as reading people's minds or studying individual minds. So, American Psychological Association looks at psychology as the scientific study of the mind, as it explores mental processes too. You remember the first definition I mentioned? I talked about scientific study of human and animal behavior, and then mental processes. So, American Psychological Association also recognizes the exploration of mental processes, and these mental processes could include things like the function of the brain, emotions, individual personality, how individuals interact with their environment, and so on and so forth. Now, another psychologist called Charles G. Morris also look at psychology as the science of behavior and mental processes. And in his definition, it seeks to describe, understand, predict, and control behavior. This, like I said, is the other version of what psychology is all about. Now, if you remember in our definition, we made mention of behavior. And of course, it is important for us to know what behavior is. And what is behavior? I may not be able to explain it in such a way that it will be, appeal to some of us. But all of us behave. The way we act, the way we react, our actions, our behavior, I'm not using the word behavior again. Okay, so our actions, our thinking. Remember, behavior is not just what we see. With time, you can understand that better. Behavior is not just what we see. Behavior can be things that an individual does, maybe consciously or unconsciously, that are seen or not seen. And that is the reason why psychologically we look at behavior as dividing into two basic types. And what are these two basic types of behavior? We look at overt behaviors and then we look at covert behaviors. Of course, psychologically, an overt behavior is a behavior or a set of behaviors or actions that we can see as they are exhibiting. If you are looking at me physically as I speak to you, you will understand, or you will notice that as I speak and I try to explain, I will be swinging my hands. And that is a practical behavior that you can see as it is exhibited. All right. You see people walk. You see people swing their hands when they dance. You see body movements. These are overt behaviors that you can see, observable behaviors. Now, what about the ones that you cannot see as they are being exhibited? These ones are called covert behaviors. And of course, we know that there are a lot of individual behaviors that you may not be able to see them as they are being exhibited. For instance, when you are hungry, there is a portion of your brain called the start eating center. Your neurotransmitters in your body will communicate with your start eating center, and it will take that message down to your stomach, or to your brain rather, that there is nothing in your stomach. And that is when you will now start feeling hunger pangs. And when food starts entering into your stomach, your body will start reacting to it. And as it is reacting, neurotransmitters are working continuously to send some of those messages from one part of your body to another. And of course, as they are sending it, you are feeling it inside of you. What about things like emotions? Emotions don't just come out. Your laughter, your smiles, they don't just come out on their own. There is a process that goes on in your body, and that process takes a lot of time, though it may be so fast, but it takes a lot of, different activities. So these behaviors that, are being carried out within an individual that cannot be directly observed are called covert behavior. Remember, we began with the introduction of psychology. We say psychology is the study of human and animal behaviors, including mental processes. And we laid emphasis on the word behavior. And we say behavior is such like activities, what an individual does, what happens within an individual. And we say behavior can be categorized into two. We say it can be overt behaviors and it can be covert behaviors. I made small summary of some of the things I just mentioned now. Speaking, running, clapping, all these are overt behaviors that you can see. Behaviors like thinking, remembering, worrying, and so on and so forth. All these ones you cannot see as they are being exhibited. You can only see the manifestation, either in facial expression or in the kind of things that people do. These ones are called covert behaviors. Now, generally, psychology is built on 4 basic goals, and we call that goals of psychology. It's built on 4 basic goals. And these goals are to describe behavior, to explain behavior, to predict behavior, and then to control behavior. Now, first of all, we start with describing behavior. As we look around us, even where you are listening to me talk, or as you are listening to me talk on this video, if you look around you, you might see certain things that are happening. You might see people walking around. You might see people doing certain things. You might see people cooking if you are in a hostel, or if you are in a bar, or in a barber shop. You can see people, walking around doing one or two things. These are things that you can see as they are happening. You can easily describe these behaviors. You would describe the fact that somebody is picking one book from one place to another. Somebody is picking something from this place to another. And you can describe how is it done, how is that behavior being done. So to describe behavior is like the how of the behavior. How was the behavior exhibited? Or how is the behavior being exhibited? That is the describing of behavior. So one of the goals of psychology, which is the first, is to describe how a behavior is being exhibited. Somebody is running. How is he running? He's running fast. He's running slowly. Somebody is crying. How is he crying? He's crying so loud, or he's crying maybe you can just see a few tears or something of that nature. So that is describing behavior. Now, going beyond the description of behavior, you can see, you will go to the next, which is what? To explain behavior. And in explaining behavior, it has to do with the why of that behavior. Psychology generally is built on, let me say, has a lot of aspects of biology in it. For those of you that have taken the course for a number of times, you will notice that psychology has a lot of biological explanations. And every individual behavior has a biological explanation. Every single behavior that we exhibit has a biological explanation. Why do you cry? There's a biological explanation to it. Why do you laugh? There's a biological explanation to it. And of course, you know that's one of the reasons why some of you will say that, okay, people are reading individual minds. Why? Because a lot of us psychologists may have seen the description of some of these behaviors. And once they see these behaviors, because of the experiences they've had about other people that exhibit similar behaviors, they can easily say that, yes, this person is crying because of this. And so with that kind of experience and that kind of explanation, it is usually very easy for us to be able to say that this is happening because this particular thing has happened or something of this nature has happened. All right. So that is the second goal of psychology. After describing the behavior and knowing the how of that behavior, we go further to explain why that behavior is being exhibited. Now, the next is to predict behavior. To predict behavior. Predicting behavior has to do with you talking about what will come out of a particular explanation. What is the possible outcome of a particular explanation? All right. So, for instance, assuming we're in a class now, and then there is hot sun. The sun is very hot, and the class is not well ventilated. And all of us are sitting in this class. Of course, the place will be hot, and so many people will try to help themselves. If not because of the advent in technology now, a lot of students used their books to fan themselves or even hand fan. So we can easily say that, okay, somebody is fanning himself, which is a description of a behavior. And why is the person fanning himself? Because the room we are seated is not ventilated and is carrying a lot of people. So you can easily predict from that behavior that what will now happen. Wherever there are so many people in a room where there is no ventilation, it is possible that they will get hot and then they will do what? They will fan themselves. That is just a typical explanation of what I can think about now. You can put yourself into a situation where these kind of things could come out. So you try to bring out a description, an explanation, and then a prediction. Prediction has to do with you forecasting how something is likely going to happen. Right? I was talking about we reading people's mind, or of course that's one of the things, because we notice that for instance when you see a lion, for instance, it is expected that you will do what? You will run. So we can say you are running because you have seen a lion. So it is possible to say whenever somebody sees a lion, the person is likely going to do what? To run. So that is what I'm trying to explain. So as a result of some of these things that we have seen or how we see them exhibited, we can easily predict that when this happens, this is likely going to be the outcome. Now, the final goal of psychology, which is the fourth, is to control behavior, to control or to influence behavior. All right. So this is one of the goals, and this is the last. We apply the knowledge of people, the knowledge that we have about people, to be able to help and manage their situation. Apply the knowledge to be able to help and manage their situation. So that is one of the ways, one of the goals of psychology. And in doing this, a lot of psychologists use therapy. A therapy is like treatment of a psychological disorder without the use of drugs, without necessarily the use of drugs. So we can use therapy to be able to do that, or teaching you how to, relax, tension, and all of that. So these are the four basic goals of psychology. Remember, I said there are four. I said to describe what is happening, or how. How did it happen? The how of a behavior, what? How did it happen? Then to explain why it happened, to predict what is likely going to happen if something of this nature comes up, and then finally to control behavior. So within this few period, I've been able to explain a few things about psychology. Remember, we are talking about developmental psychology. Our concentration is not necessarily on psychology generally, but we needed to lay this foundation so that we can explain developmental psychology better or very well. Now, let's now try to understand developmental psychology. Now, developmental psychology is a scientific study of how and why human beings change over the course of their lifetime. It is a subfield of psychology that studied the development of an individual from birth to death. From the day you were conceived, of course, you know that conception takes place, the person stays in either an incubator, or because there is artificial insemination and people do that now, all right? Yeah, so, or you stay in the belly of a woman for 9 months, depending, maybe before or less than or more, and then you are giving birth to, you are a child, a toddler first, you progress to early adolescent, middle adolescent, late adolescent, then you eventually go to an adult, maybe young adult, and then you proceed until you age and you die. So that field of psychology that concentrates on the development of an individual from your birth or from when you were conceived until when you were born up until when you die, that field is called developmental psychology. And developmental psychology focuses on physical, cognitive, emotional, and social changes that occur in an individual from your conception till when you die. Remember, I made mention of that before. From the day you were conceived, developmental psychology is interested in knowing every change that occurs in you as an individual. These changes may not necessarily be physical changes. They can be cognitive changes, they can be emotional changes, they can be social changes, and so on and so forth. From that time that you were conceived till you die. And of course, we are meant to also understand that this field of developmental psychology is not just concerned with how people grow and develop, but is also concerned with what remains stable across times as they develop from one stage to another. Of course, like I said earlier, it is a subdivision of psychology. That psychology has a lot of divisions, a lot of subfields. Like every other field of study, psychology has a lot of fields. It has developmental psychology, which is what we're learning now. It has industrial and organizational psychology. It has clinical psychology. It has school psychology. It has military psychology. It has psychometrics. It has experimental psychology. Name the fields. There are many. So developmental psychology is one of the fields of psychology. Now, we are meant to also understand that all the segments of lifespan or developmental patterns of a child, adolescent, adulthood, and old age are being covered by this particular field of study. Developmental psychology is also defined as the ontogenetic study of the development of organisms from conception through childhood, adolescent, adult, and then till you die. All right. So all these ones are just the definitions of developmental psychology. We go further, we see a lot of others that have said a lot of other things that have been said about psychology, but the material is up here, so it's easier for you to can just go through it and you see some of the definitions that we have put up for developmental psychology. So on a general, developmental psychology is not like a subfield. It's a subfield, not just like it's a subfield of psychology. And what is the major concentration of developmental psychology? It studies an individual development, and this development can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be cognitive, it can be, whatever have you from the day you were conceived until the day you die. Now, developmental psychology, like every other field of psychology, also concentrates on the 4 goals that I mentioned earlier. First of all is to describe human development at different stages. We have a lot of people around us. Within the period that we have been in school, we can see certain developmental changes around them. Some of them, when they go back home and they come back, we see that they are either they've added weight or they've lost weight, depending on the situation at hand. So you can also see that happen in them. So you can also use developmental psychology also explains what are the causes of these changes. What are the causes of these developmental changes? That is to explain. Maybe when you go home, your mom is feeding you morning, afternoon, and night, and then you have all the food and time to be sleeping. You don't do anything. So, of course, before you leave home and come back, you must have added weight and something of that nature. Or you go home and you find yourself in a situation that is not very palatable, and then you end up not coming back well. That's just an explanation or an example. Either way. So, you can just see that. So we use that to also explain. Developmental psychology explains too what are the causes, what are the things that influences some of these changes or all these changes that we have occurring in individuals. Now we can use that to also predict. Of course, remember that from that description, you can explain, and while you are explaining, you can predict from the explanation that if this happens, this is what is likely going to be the outcome. And of course, you can also intervene or control. Control here has to do with improving the outcome, especially in the area of education, health, caregiving, and so on and so forth. So you see that even in the developmental psychology, these 4 goals that I explained earlier are captured. Now, we look at briefly about domains of developmental psychology. And the developmental psychology has different domains. It has different domains. But for the sake of this class, we are going to look at just 3 of these domains. We look at the physical development, we look at the cognitive development, and we look at the psychosocial development. On the physical development, of course, we can see it happen physically. All right, changes in the body, changes in your brain, your motor skills, your health, biological system, biological clock, and so on and so forth. These are the physical changes, physical domain about developmental psychology. What has happened to you as an individual? Of course, as a toddler, you have a time will come when we will discuss certain theories of psychological development. And one of the theories that we will discuss will have to do with Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of development, which talks about 5 basic aspects of individual development, which is the oral stage, the anal, the genital, the latency, and so on and so forth. So we look at these physical changes. How are they occurring? You see them occur at different stages. As you move from one stage to another, you see yourself possessing physical changes that can be seen visibly. Of course, as you are growing higher as a young man. As a man, your chest, at a point in time, your chest will become broader. You start having a deep voice. You have hair growing on your face, particularly the lower part of your face, and then so on and so forth. So that is that. And as a woman, of course, you know that you are going to have your own developmental changes, so physical changes that we can see at age 12 generally, or 13. You are expected to start developing breast and something of this nature. You start having pubic hair, and all of these things are the physical development or physical changes that we can look at in the domain of developmental psychology. Now, another thing in the domain is the cognitive development. Cognitively, you develop also, isn't it? Changes in your thinking. As a child, it will be the way you think will be different from when you start getting to adolescent and then eventually adult. Although a lot of people don't change in terms of thinking. Anyway, apologies to some of you that may not see it that way, but then some people, even when they become adult, they still think like children, unfortunately, anyways. But then we can say that, okay, that can be cognitive change. Cognitive change has to do with your thinking, how you solve problems, your language development, your intelligence, your memory, and everything that accompanies that. Your intelligence quotient is expected to also improve, and so on and so forth. So this is one of the domains that developmental psychology concentrates on. Another domain is the psychosocial development. Psychosocial development has to do with psychological and social development. That is the reason why it is named as psychosocial, psychological and social development. And here has to do with the changes in your personality, your emotions, your relationship with one another, your self-concept. How do you look at yourself? Your social skills, and so on and so forth. So these things are expected to also develop. It's one of the dimensions. As a person, your personality as a child is not expected to be the same with when you are an adolescent and then when you eventually become an adult. These things are expected to change from one stage of your development to another, even as you grow old. So all these domains interact consistently and constantly. All right, all the domains always interact within themselves. The physical domains are also, as they are developing, they are interacting with your cognitive domains, and then they are interacting with what? Your psychosocial domains. Because it is expected that as you grow and you add height and weight, your reasoning, your problem-solving ability is also expected to flow along with that particular stage of your development. And how you interact, your emotions and everything among with people is expected to also grow and reach that particular stage that you have gotten to. So they interact consistently, they interact constantly, so that they form the kind of individual, the you in you that you end up being as an individual. So these are the domains that we talk about in developmental psychology. Now, quickly let's look at key issues in developmental psychology. What are the key issues in developmental psychology? Majorly, there are about 3 of them. The most prominent is about nature versus nurture. Now, let me quickly ask you a question here. Between nature and nurture, which of them do you think contributes more to the development of an individual? Between nature and nurture. Of course, you know what nature and nurture is. Nature is your biological makeup, your hereditary aspect, the hereditary aspect of you that you take from your parents that you were born with. But nurture has to do with the places, the environment, and the people you grew up with. So what are these two? Among these two, which of them contributes more to the development of an individual, both intelligence and otherwise? Please let's go to the comment section and answer that question. If you have a tangible answer, go to the comment section and answer the question. So it is we are looking at is development influenced by the genetic components of an individual, or it is influenced by the environment where you grow. Most psychologists today believe that, of course, an individual's development and growth is not determined by just one. It's determined by the combination of two. But the issue of nature versus nurture has been a debate that has been in place for a very long time now. A lot of people are still finding it difficult to have a consensus as to which of these aspects contributes more to the development of an individual. But this is a debate I would want you to contribute. Bring in your thoughts in the comment section so that we can also flow as we move. Now, another key issue in developmental psychology is continuity versus discontinuity. And these two aspects look at, does development occur gradually over time, that is continuity, or through distinct stage, that's discontinuity? Is it that somebody has a particular period where he would develop to a particular point and stop there, and then a time will come when he will still move from that stage and develop and stop to another stage? Or the development is occurring on a continuum? Continuum means every day the person is developing, every day the person is developing. We can also have your thoughts in the comment section. Another key issue is stability versus change. Are individuals fundamentally the same throughout life, or do they change significantly over time? We have always been talking about, you have changed though, we have changed, you have changed though, you have changed though. And then is this how it's supposed to be, or it is supposed to be static? When you are a good person, you are supposed to be a good person all through your life, or it is expected that a time will come when you will be a good person and a time will come when you will not be a good person? These are some of the things that we look at on stability versus change. Now, the last but not the least is critical versus sensitive periods. Here, we'll ask questions like, are there specific times when certain types of development must occur, that is critical period, or are they more flexible as sensitive period? Is there a particular time when a particular period when a developmental change on an individual will occur? In Nigeria, for instance, we talk about at 18, you are an adult, isn't it? So is it that you must get to that 18 before a particular change will occur in your life? Maybe physical, psychosocial, or cognitive. You see that you must get to that stage before it will occur, or it's usually flexible. These are some of the key issues we talk about. So please, if you have gone through this, kindly go to the comment section and drop your thoughts about these 3 or 4 basic questions we have asked, so that you can also contribute to this. Now, we look briefly at historical components of developmental psychology. We are not going to talk much on this, but I implore you to quickly look at it and see how you can, fit in. So, over time, the field of psychology continues to evolve, and the field of developmental psychology also continues to evolve. But there are key significant issues, significant periods in times of history when we can say that this was the emergence of developmental psychology. Remember when I started this lecture, I said psychology as a field comes from, like every other field, comes from philosophy. And philosophy, according to scientists, is the mother of all fields. So there are certain philosophers that over time, their works contributed to the development of this field. For instance, between 1712 and 1778, a particular philosopher called Jean Jacques emphasized natural development and believed that children are innately good. These are some of the works that he did. This was what started giving birth to the field of developmental psychology. Now, Charles Darwin in 1809, between 1809 and 1882, collected observable data on children development and contributed to the early research methods, particularly in this area. Remember, within this period, there was no specific field that can be ascribed as or can be regarded as developmental psychology. But some of these historical facts are some of the things that we trace them back to how developmental psychology began. Now, between 1844, that was within the same time of Charles Darwin, 1844 and 1924, a psychologist, a philosopher called G. Stanley Hall, regarded as the father of developmental psychology, founded the child study movement in the United States. This was the major epoch-making historical event that started the field of developmental psychology. And we can categorically say that the father of developmental psychology is who? Stanley G. Hall. He was one of the people that made a major contribution that began the works of developmental psychology. Of course, in between that time, people like Jean Piaget were also working, and that is between 1896 to 1896 to 1980. Jean Piaget also, although if you see this period, it was almost the same time or intertwining with that works of Stanley G. Hall. But Jean Piaget introduced the most influential cognitive development theory. If you go to check the work of Jean Piaget, you will see that he was one of the people that contributed immensely. Now, Erik Erikson also came up with major findings. Of course, in the course of our conversation, we will discuss Erik Erikson's theory, and this was between 1902 to 1994. Erik Erikson developed a psychological theory of development across the lifespan. I think the developmental theory has about 8 basic sections. You will see as time goes on, you will see them. We'll discuss that further because Erik Erikson was one of the major contributors in developmental psychology. Now, after Erik Erikson, a lot of psychologists also contributed in the development of the field of developmental psychology. A lot others. We have behaviorists like Ivan Pavlov. We have behaviorists like Edward Thorndike, B.F. Skinner, Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow was not necessarily, behaviorist. So some of their works in behavioral psychology, in the behavioral psychology as a case you may want to call it, also contribute to the development of developmental psychology. Now, why do we need this developmental psychology? For instance, for those of you in the area of nursing, why do you think developmental psychology is important? It is important across different fields. Of course, in the course of your practice as a nurse, you will come across a lot of developmental psychological changes that if you are not conversant with, it may be difficult for you to actually apply whatever treatment you are applying on an individual involved. Always remember that a lot of some of the physical ailments that we have around the world are not born directly from the physical aspect, the main issue begins from the psychological aspect. And once you are able to handle that psychological aspect, it becomes easy for you to handle the physical aspect too. Now you can use developmental psychology to improve your child rearing practices. You can use it to inform educational approaches. You can support mental health and well-being. You can enhance aging and elderly care. You can also address developmental disorders as well as disabilities. Now let's quickly summarize. Remember, in the course of this conversation, I told you that developmental psychology, I first of all began with the introduction of psychology. So psychology is defined as the scientific study of human and animal behavior, including mental processes. And we say that psychology has four basic behavior generally is divided into two. It is divided into overt and covert behaviors, overt being the ones that we can see, while covert behaviors being the behaviors that we may not see as they are being exhibited. We also say psychology has basically four goals, which are to describe behavior, to explain behavior, to predict behavior, and then to control behavior. I also talked about developmental psychology as a subfield of psychology. Of course, we said psychology has different fields, and developmental psychology is one of them. And we say developmental psychology explores how humans grow, adapt, and change across their lifespan. Of course, I also mentioned earlier that developmental psychology covers not just the physical aspect, but it covers the cognitive and the psychological domains. Remember, I made mention of three basic domains. I say physical, cognitive, and what? Psychosocial. And it also addresses key questions which are bordering on nurture versus nature, continuity versus discontinuity, and so on and so forth. Now, I also made mention briefly that developmental psychology has its roots, like every other field, in philosophy. And I made mention of early scientists whose work contributed immensely in the development of developmental psychology. And we say Stanley G. Hall is regarded as the father of developmental psychology. We talked about Erik Erikson, and we say we are going to discuss more about Erik Erikson's works as time goes on. Please, if you are listening, if you are on this video, I plead with you to kindly subscribe and turn on the notification button on. Subscription is usually free, right? As we know. So just click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that as we drop more videos, particularly in this area, you will also follow and be with us. Thank you once again for joining. God bless you.